choosing a life partner is an extremely important decision. This person can either become a full-fledged family member or turn into a real nightmare. Our story today is about the latter scenario, which resulted in insanity for an entire family and led to the death of 3 people. Darren is an ordinary provincial town in the state of Illinois, USA. It has a population of about 20,000 residents. Located near Chicago, this town, despite its small size, gained considerable popularity in the 1980s, becoming the setting and prototype for several films. However, in 2010, Darren was shaken by a horrific crime, the memories of which still haunt the local residents. On that fateful night, March 2, 2010, around 3 a.m., an emergency call came into the police dispatcher. In a trembling voice, hiding in the wardrobe closet of her parents' bedroom, a young girl begged for help. She was afraid of being heard, because it seemed that the Kremmer's family home was under attack. The girl said that literally a few minutes before her call, an unknown intruder had broken into the house and was shooting her family members. She counted about 10 shots. By the time she spoke to the dispatcher, the house had fallen silent. However, the girl did not dare to leave her shelter, fearing that the attacker might still be inside. Upon receiving the call, the police immediately set out for the specified address. Within 5 minutes, the first patrol car stopped at the Kremmer's house. At that moment, a shadow flashed near a window on the side of the house. The police instantly detained a young man, hoping that he was the perpetrator. But it turned out to be Anthony, the eldest son of the house owner. In general, his story coincided with what the girl who called the police had reported. Anthony had also woken up to the sound of gunshots that rang out at night while he was sleeping in his room on the first floor. The frightened young man managed to hide and stayed in his shelter until police cars arrived. Hearing the sirens, he calmed down and decided to go outside. But, afraid to go through the house, he used the window. That's how he ended up in the view of the patrol officers. Anthony also could not say whether the killer had left the house. He did not see the attackers and could not provide any identifying details. Upon entering the house through the front door, the police immediately came across the first body. It was a 50-year-old man with numerous bullet wounds. He was lying in the middle of the stairs leading to the second floor. A little further on was the body of his 48-year-old wife, also killed by gunshots. Right by the garage door on the floor lay the third victim, the couple's younger 20-year-old son. In the walk-in closet of the master bedroom, police found Angela, the same girl who had called for help. Fortunately, she was unharmed. There were no other survivors in the house. Law enforcement officers led Angela outside, covering her eyes to protect her from the gruesome sight of her relatives' dead bodies. Now the investigation had to find out what really happened that night in the Kremmer's house and what could have been the motive for such a brutal murder of 3 people. Like most of the town's residents, the Kremmers chose Darren to build a better life and raise their children. They moved here back in the 1980s. Jeffrey and Lori met as schoolchildren, had been dating ever since, and never parted. After coming of age, they got married. Later, the couple had 3 children, their eldest son Anthony, daughter Angela, and youngest son Michael. Jeffrey founded his own auto repair shop in the town, which thrived thanks to his skill as a mechanic. People came to him from all over the county. Jeffrey devoted all his free time to his family. He was a loving husband, a caring father, and simply a nice person. Lori worked as a teacher at the same school where all 3 of her children studied. Her favorite pastime was gardening. She enjoyed planting flowers around the house. The youngest son Michael wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. He also had a good understanding of cars and planned to get an appropriate education to join the family business. The eldest son Anthony had other plans. He sought independence and dreamed of living separately, but so far he did not have such an opportunity. To get at least somewhat closer to the coveted independence, Anthony set up his own living space in the basement of his parents' house with a separate kitchen and bathroom. However, the entrance doors remained shared, so in fact, he still lived with his parents, although they did not limit his freedom. The entire Kremmer family was known for their friendliness and unity. They were sincere, welcoming people who were respected by everyone around them. The Kremmers never got into any trouble or conflicts. They always tried to solve any problems peacefully, through dialogue. And such tactics invariably worked, until that terrible night when 3 family members were shot. Angela and Anthony, who were lucky to survive, met outside the house and hugged each other tightly, rejoicing that they were alive. While the police continued working at the crime scene, another girl, about 20 years old, approached the house. She was very agitated and tried to get into the yard, but law enforcement officers stopped her. It turned out that she was the girlfriend of the murdered Michael. The girl admitted that she was with him that night and witnessed the beginning of the attack on the Kremmer's house. The testimony of Michael's girlfriend proved to be extremely valuable to the investigation. Thanks to it, detectives were able to start reconstructing the chronology of that tragic night. The evening began quite ordinarily. The girl, as was often the case, came to visit her beloved. The Kremmers invited her to dinner. The relationship of the couple was approved by both families, so such visits did not surprise anyone. The older generation had high hopes for the joint future of Michael and his chosen one. After dinner, the house residents went their separate ways. Lori, Jeffrey and Angela went upstairs, Anthony went down to his basement dwelling, and Michael and his girlfriend settled in the living room in front of the TV. The couple was going to watch something together before the girl had to leave, but both dozed off. They were awakened by the sound of breaking glass. Michael's girlfriend managed to notice someone breaking the remnants of the window to get inside. In a moment, a man dressed all in black was already standing in the living room. His face was covered, so it did not seem possible to identify the attacker. As soon as the intruder entered the room, he immediately fired at the frightened couple. Michael and the girl rushed to escape through the garage doors. That was the nearest exit. The girl managed to run out of the house, not suspecting that her boyfriend had been shot. At the cost of his own life, Michael won a few seconds for his beloved, shielding her with himself. She ran out through the garage to the street, unable to stop out of fear. Shots were ringing out behind her. The girl thought the killer was chasing her. But that was not the case. While she was fleeing, the shooter remained in the house, dealing with the rest of the family. Having run a few houses away, the girl finally dared to look back. She realized that no one was following her. Going back seemed too dangerous, so she headed to the nearest neighbors for help. All this time, the girl was in a state of shock and had no idea that Michael was not actually with her. Only when the neighbors opened the door did she realize the terrible truth. Later, detectives spoke with Anthony, the only Kremmer who survived that night. His story largely coincided with the girl's words. After dinner, he went to his basement room to watch TV. Unlike his brother and his girlfriend, Anthony did not hear the window break. Instead, he vividly remembered the first shot that started the nightmare. Frightened, the young man hid under the pool table. Confused, he just waited for it to end. As suddenly as it began, the shooting stopped just as abruptly. However, Anthony did not dare to come out until the police arrived. Only when he heard the sirens did he decide to get outside through the window, afraid to run into the armed attacker in the house. According to Anthony, out of fear he could not even get to the next room where the phone was. In turn, Angela also woke up from the commotion. She rushed to her parents' bedroom to find out what was going on, not yet realizing the full danger. However, her parents were not in the room. Awakened by the shooting, they ran downstairs. Realizing the full horror of what was happening, the frightened Angela hid in the safest place she found nearby, in the wardrobe closet. Luckily, she had her phone with her. Unlike her brother, the girl did not get confused and called the 911 emergency service. Investigators suggested that the Kremmer couple rushed downstairs to protect their children after hearing the first shot. But helpless against the armed killer, they only became his next victims, killed by .40 caliber bullets right on the stairs. Apparently, the shooter's first target was the youngest family member, Michael. The version of a failed robbery was immediately discarded, because nothing was missing from the house. Rather, it was a planned murder, the detectives claimed. As emerged from the testimony of the survivors, the criminal did not even try to track down all the inhabitants, did not search the upper floors or the basement. Obviously, his target was one of the three killed, or all of them. Lori and Jeffrey probably were not part of the original plan and paid with their lives only because they got in the way of the killer. It is quite possible that the main target of the attack was Michael himself. And this could contain the clue to the whole tragedy. So the investigators set about looking for possible ill-wishers of the youngest Kremmer son. At the same time, they considered the possible involvement of Anthony, Angela, or Michael's girlfriend in the crime. It is possible that one of them was not telling the whole truth or was hiding important details. However, Michael's girlfriend was almost immediately excluded from the circle of suspects. She had neither motive nor means to arrange the attack. But in the case of the older Kremmer children, financial interest could well have taken place. After all, with the death of their parents, the entire sizable inheritance would have passed to Angela and Anthony. Moreover, the fewer heirs remained alive, the larger the amount each would receive. The Kremmers were not poor. Jeffrey's business had thrived for many years, so in addition to the couple's house, they obviously had considerable savings. Forensic experts carefully examined the crime scene, and their conclusions completely coincided with the testimony of the young people. The versions of events presented by Anthony, Angela and Michael's girlfriend fit perfectly into the picture seen by the experts. Thus, suspicions about this trio were dismissed. Moreover, after interviewing close friends and acquaintances of the family, investigators found no hint of any problems or conflicts between the Kremmers. On the contrary, everyone unanimously claimed that it was an extremely friendly and close-knit family. Each of its members had an impeccable reputation as a decent and respected person, so the idea of any internal intrigues seemed completely out of place. However, Angela did mention one person who could well be among the suspects. The girl said that a few months before the tragedy, she broke up with her boyfriend named Johnny Borisov. He, by the way, was friends with her previous lover Stephen. A few years ago, Stephen and his father died in a car accident. This loss was a terrible blow for both Angela and Johnny. It was very hard for both of them. But at the same time, the shared grief brought the friends closer. They supported each other in every way, and later romantic feelings flared up between them. The romance lasted about 2 years, until Angela became pregnant. The birth of their son in 2009 was a turning point in the couple's relationship and Johnny's behavior. He suddenly turned into an aggressive and extremely manipulative man. Although, according to the girl, it did not come to physical abuse, Johnny constantly made scenes and intimidated her with threats. He seemed completely unable to control his anger. Angela recalled how he could instantly flare up with rage over some little thing and start accusing her of things she did not do. And even that, according to the Kremmer's daughter, did not ultimately push her to break up. The outbursts of aggression were frightening, but they did not happen that often. The real red line was Johnny's attempts to quarrel Angela with her relatives in order to distance her from her family. The young man constantly provoked conflicts with the Kremmers, and the situation got out of control. Angela realized that in order to fix everything, there was only one way out: to divorce Johnny. Which she did a few weeks before the terrible shooting. A legal battle began between the former lovers over custody of their shared child and alimony. Interestingly, on the night of the murder, their son was just visiting his father. The police decided to interrogate Johnny, because the story of his relationship with Angela seemed quite suspicious to them. The man was summoned to the station, and he agreed to come. Johnny behaved very restlessly, explaining his anxiety by a news report he saw about the shooting at the Kremmer's house, where 3 people were killed. The young man was terribly afraid that among the dead could be Angela, the mother of his child. However, learning from the detectives that she was all right, Johnny for some reason did not calm down, but remained just as nervous. When asked where he was on that fateful night, the suspect replied that he had sat in the casino until 4 in the morning, leaving his son in the care of his mother. Checking this alibi was not difficult. The institution's video cameras recorded Johnny's presence at the specified time. The attack on the Kremmers took place around 3 o'clock in the morning, which means that Borisov could not have been the direct perpetrator of the crime. However, investigators understood that having a serious motive, he could well have acted through someone else's hands. Meanwhile, one of the police officers working on the case recalled that about 2 hours after the shooting, some man called the station. At that time, all forces were thrown into the investigation of the triple murder, so the call, which seemed to have nothing to do with it, was not given much importance. And that's a pity. Because the caller was none other than Johnny Borisov himself. He complained that around 4 in the morning, when he was returning from the casino, his former roommate Jake Padares called him. He was terribly agitated, on the verge of a panic attack. He was mumbling something about someone following him for a long time and even chasing his car on the highway. The detectives decided to dig deeper into this lead. It turned out that such panic attacks were not uncommon for Jake. He had suffered from depression since childhood, which was most likely a consequence of the excessive severity and control of his extremely religious parents. They forbade their son everything, from ordinary communication with peers to going to parties with friends. In an atmosphere of total restrictions, the boy began to experience symptoms of depressive disorder from the age of 10. It turned out that Jake Padares was one of Johnny Borisov's closest friends. The coincidences kept piling up. Michael, the youngest of the murdered Kremmers, who was most likely the main target of the attacker, had considerable problems in his relationship with Jake. Every time their paths crossed, Padares started some kind of senseless conflicts. There were completely absurd scenes. He even threatened to kill Michael. The latter, in turn, tried in every way to avoid any communication with the unbalanced guy. This was the basis for another quarrel, which could well have been the motive for the massacre. But Jake's biography completely baffled the detectives. Until now, he had never been in the field of view of law enforcement, except for a single fine for running a red light. This young man did not at all look like a person capable of taking up arms just because of some stupid argument with an acquaintance. While Johnny was answering the investigators' questions, the police were trying to find Jake, but he seemed to have disappeared into thin air. It is interesting that Borisov was at the interrogation unofficially, so he could freely leave the office during the conversation. And he did it surprisingly often, because someone kept calling him all the time. In the end, the detectives decided to get a warrant to seize his cell phone to find out the identity of the persistent caller. That's when they began to suspect that both friends, Johnny and Jake, could be involved in the crime. A check of the phone showed that all incoming calls came from a contact named Jake. Judging by the text messages, the pair was vigorously discussing something that looked like some kind of action plan. What most interested the investigators was that this Jake was called Padares in a narrow circle of friends. Finally, a connection was found between the two persons involved in the case. In order not to spook either of the suspects, the detectives decided to act carefully. They tried to contact Jake's relatives. It turned out that recently he had been living with his grandmother and grandfather, having run away from the excessive control of his parents. However, the elderly relatives had no idea where their grandson might be now. Coincidence after coincidence, Padares disappeared just after the shooting at the Kremmer's house. He did not even bother to warn the old people where he was going. But they did not ask either. They understood that the young man was already an adult and was not obliged to report his every move. However, the investigators were disturbed by the circumstances and timing of his disappearance, which time and again pointed to Jake. Relatives confirmed that the young man often had bouts of depression. Despite the obvious need for treatment, he always refused to take prescribed medications, believing that he was able to cope with his problems on his own. Even persuading him to go for a consultation with a psychiatrist was a real test. Rejecting the sincere attempts of his loved ones to help, Jake found solace in. He justified his pernicious habit by saying that when high, he forgot about thoughts of taking his own life. But it turned out that Padares met Borisov even before he became addicted to the forbidden substance. Johnny himself was selling and, in fact, got his friend hooked. Both Jake's grandparents and everyone who knew him well unanimously assured that he would never have taken a single dose if not for Johnny's detrimental influence. The picture that emerged was horrifying. Borisov appeared to be a true master of manipulation, capable of exploiting the weaknesses of a vulnerable young man with mental disorders for the sake of some personal vendetta. And evidence against the two of them began to appear one after another. For example, it was discovered that about a month before the attack on the Kremmers, Jake had legally purchased a .40 caliber pistol, allegedly for self-defense. The caliber of the weapon matched the casings found at the crime scene, and therefore could well have been used for the shooting in the family's house. And how, one wonders, did a person with documented mental disorders even manage to obtain a permit to carry a firearm? Learning about all these facts, even Jake's closest relatives began to suspect his involvement in the attack. Padares really did seem like the perfect candidate for the role of killer, mentally unstable, easily suggestible, gullible. At least all the indirect evidence pointed to this. But to contact the young man himself, even his grandmother and grandfather, was impossible. So the police called Jake's parents, who lived in Florida. And they hit the bullseye. It turns out that just a few hours earlier, their son had visited them and informed them of his intention to stay for a while. The detectives planned to go to the Sunshine State and wait for the suspect to arrive. Further developments were rather strange. Jake himself called the police complaining that someone was following his car on the road. But when law enforcement arrived at his parents' house, they found no one there, nor the suspect's van itself. Fearing that Padares might have come to his relatives with ill intentions, armed cops carefully approached the house. Fortunately, nothing bad happened, the young man had simply fallen asleep. He was woken up and taken to the station for questioning. The van was also confiscated as evidence. Despite the investigators' expectations, no bloody clothing or weapons were found in the vehicle. Jake himself was in a terrible condition, under the influence of. When he finally came to his senses, he was able to talk to the police. The young man was mumbling something about becoming an accidental target for the local drug cartel, which was now hunting him. Padares begged to protect all his loved ones, and he himself agreed to tell what really happened. Jake was extradited to Illinois, where he was arrested. During the interrogation, he admitted that he had indeed been friends with Johnny for many years, even living in his house for some time. As investigators suspected, it was Borisov who got the future killer hooked on. When Johnny began having problems in his relationship with Angela, he revealed a terrible secret to his friend. It turns out that Borisov headed an entire criminal group that was engaged in the distribution of forbidden substances. His beloved also knew about this. So after the divorce, when disputes flared up over custody of their shared child and alimony, the manipulator became afraid that his ex-girlfriend would use the compromising evidence to turn him in to the police. Johnny convinced Jake that although he was not directly involved in drug trafficking, law enforcement was unlikely to sort it out, he would also be affected. Gradually, Borisov managed to instill in his friend the paranoid idea that Angela posed a real, albeit completely unfounded, threat to both of them. But the most terrible thing was something else. There was actually no cartel. It was just a figment of the insidious Johnny's imagination in order to control the gullible Jake like a puppet. So, taking advantage of Padares' unstable mental state, which was also completely undermined by uncontrolled drug abuse, Borisov began to methodically instill in him the idea of the danger allegedly coming from the entire Kremmer family. This was especially successful during Jake's drug trips. Eventually, he sincerely came to believe that in order to save them both, he had to kill everyone he encountered in Angela's house. The day before the tragedy, the treacherous friend told the intoxicated henchman that the cartel boss had allegedly ordered to immediately deal with the Kremmers, otherwise the bandits would destroy the families of both Jake and Johnny himself. Having completely lost touch with reality due to manipulation and a drug-clouded mind, Padares agreed to commit this terrible crime. Together with Borisov, they drew up a detailed plan of the house and began to implement their bloody intent. It was then that Johnny let slip that he himself was going to commit a contract killing for the cartel that evening, but got scared at the last moment. Of course, this was all a complete lie, just another technique to completely confuse the already clouded mind of his hapless friend. On that fateful night, Borisov went to the casino to provide himself with an impeccable alibi under the watchful eye of the surveillance cameras. The investigation, however, was convinced that the real motive was the desire to take revenge on his ex-girlfriend for the breakup, the division of parental rights over their one-year-old son, and the payment of alimony. According to Jake's testimony, he broke into the house by breaking a window in the living room. There he was immediately noticed by the startled Michael and his girlfriend, who were dozing on the sofa. Padares opened fire on the fleeing couple and caught up with the young man with the first bullet. The girl managed to run out of the house, but the killer did not pursue her. Instead, he saw Jeffrey and Lori running down the stairs, awakened by the shots. Although the original plan involved the massacre of all family members, having shot the younger son and his parents, Jake realized what he had done. He panicked and fled, even leaving the hammer he used to break the window pane at the crime scene. Later, it was thanks to this tool that the investigation was able to prove the attacker's connection to the Kremmer's house. After that, Padares was terribly afraid of revenge from the cartel, because he had not completed the order in full. He left Angela and Anthony alive. However, he did tell the police where to look for the gun. The murder weapon ended up in the trash can. When both suspects were brought in for questioning and left alone in the room, Johnny, not suspecting the presence of hidden microphones, began to blackmail Jake. Allegedly, if he did not take all the blame on himself, the bandits would deal with his family. This episode became another proof of Borisov's involvement in the bloody drama at the trial. In the end, Jake did admit his guilt. Under state law, he faced execution, which was still practiced in Illinois at the time. So in order to save his life, the killer made a deal with the investigation. He agreed to testify against Johnny in exchange for the cancellation of the death sentence. As a result, Padares was sentenced to 75 years in prison, and Johnny Borisov to life imprisonment without the right to parole. Johnny's relatives are still convinced that he is innocent and became a victim of the arbitrariness of justice. They regularly organize actions in support of Borisov, demanding a review of the sentence. However, all appeals have been rejected to date. It seems that this master of manipulation has no chance of ever getting out of prison again. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.